Welcome to the 2021 Desperado LGBTQ Film Festival, brought to you by the Maricopa County Community College District and the Paradise Valley Community College. We are honored and pleased as punch to be joined by Director Dion Labriola, Director of Dear Ike, Lost Letters to a Teen Idol. We are also joined by Alan East, the film programmer for Desperado LGBTQ Film Festival. I am tongue-tied. It's a Friday afternoon. It's been a long week, but a good one. And Dion, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us for this discussion of your wonderful film.
Oh, thanks. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. You and I have talked before, and you had a virtual screening in Rhode Island about a month and a half ago, and then you had an in-person screening at Dances with Films, which is how I had the opportunity to see this film. And I know that Ike was present for the in-person screening. We are honored to have your film. I think I'm repeating myself, but what has been the reception thus far to your film?
It was great. I mean, it's a lot easier to gauge when there's an audience, sitting with you. And during the film, it was, I had never seen it with a crowd. That was the first time at Dances with Films. So I had a list of things that I was kind of waiting to see what the reaction would be. So the reactions within the film were really great. And then after the film, I think maybe the best review I've gotten was from Allison Arngrim, who played Nellie Olson on Little House on the Prairie. She was there because she's friends with Andy, the producer. And she also, Ike was on Little House twice, so he's part of the Little House family. But afterwards, she wrote a glowing review on her Facebook page, which if anybody knows her or follows her, she is all over social media. She's really diligent about getting out there. So she actually mentioned it in one of her daily Facebook Live feeds. So that was pretty exciting.
That's awesome. The film is centered around your desire to be an artist at a very young age. And you grew up in the industrial Midwest, and it was, I imagine, a struggle to come to terms with your identity and with what you wanted to do with your life at such a young age. But one of the things that I absolutely admire about Dear Ike is the passion and zeal with which you approached your subject. And I guess I mean that both from a documentary perspective and the actual pursuits with which you attempted to contact Ike when you were a kid. Can you tell me a little bit more about the impetus for wanting to tell this documentary at this point in your life?
Wow. Well, it's when the incidents that make up the end of the film actually happened. Ever since then, it's become like a story that's in my repertoire, Anybody who has 10, 15 minutes, I'll say, I tell them this story because it's an interesting story. And it has always in the back of my mind been something I thought would make an interesting film. And then I kind of got a break in work in the end of 2016, which coincided with the 2016 election, which kind of threw the whole world on, into chaos. And so it was the timing of the two things, I had some free time. It's like, oh, I can finally start on this project. And then also I was thinking, wow, this world could really use something uplifting and lighthearted, inspirational. So that was a big part of it, was just the state of the world at the moment.
And because of the pandemic, it took a little bit longer to get the film out.
Yes.
How did that alter your plans for an eventual circuit release, such as we have here today?
Yeah, well, I had just started submitting to festivals, and then uh, they started getting canceled. I think, ironically, the first rejection letter I got was from South by Southwest, who was the first major festival to, to cancel. And then once they canceled, just everybody was canceling. So but they were still kind of like taking submissions and stuff, but I kind of took a step back and was just waited to see what was going to happen with the world. And then once things, the vaccines came out and Dances with Films, they said that they were going to be live. So I started to submit again and luckily got into quite a few. And thankfully the live festival that kind of inspired me.
Well, your film itself is very inspiring because, like you, I knew at a young age what I wanted to do, and my path took a different twist in a winding road. But I would say it would be safe to say that we never gave up on following our passions, and I think that's one of the key messages in this documentary is to stick to your guns. But you originally wanted to be an animation artist, and the animation that fills the documentary is gorgeous. Your story ideas really leap off the pages, but I think it's your the family and high school friends that you interviewed who give the genuine spark to Dear Ike. Can you talk more about how you approached seeking out your subjects? And if I'll start with that question.
Okay. Well, first of all, I mean, I had the main players who I knew I wanted to get, like David Zutter. He was my best friend from first grade. So I had to have him. My sister, of course, lived through it on a daily basis. John Damasio, who was one of the other ones that was supposed to star in the film. And I was lucky enough that those three remembered everything. Because some people, I did ask a couple people, other people that I went to high school with and junior high, and some of them were like, oh, that the 70s and the 80s are a blur. I don't know what, so it was lucky that, David and John, and then Lauren also, who's in the film, that I knew since 7th grade. Luckily enough, he turns out to live in Ventura. So it was easy enough to, go out to Ventura and interview him. And he had some great memories too. So I got lucky. The most important people that I needed to interview, I mean, of course they would remember it because it was a pretty big part of our lives back then.
I think even though the goal is to meet Ike, and you eventually do that in the documentary, your efforts to reach out to him after seeing that commercial and having seen him in the Witch Mountain movies, which I watched recently for the first time right before you and I spoke for my podcast. And he has such a dynamic and a vibrant personality. And as you and I have interacted in multiple ways over the past few months, and the way he performs on screen, you two are quite a lot alike in terms of personality. And your documentary does a really good job of paralleling your lives as two individuals, and then works its way to weaving your stories together. And one of the more pivotal moments in the documentary is when, in your sneaky ways, you reach out to his dad, who I know that in talking to Ike, he grew up in Texas. His dad was an actor. He thought he would find more opportunities in Los Angeles. So the family packed up and moved out further out west. And it turns out that Ike had, to be fair, a more successful career as a child actor, and then as he moved into adulthood. But you, I think, also had a successful career, not only as a student, but in your attempt to reach out to him. And one of those endeavors was finding a way to reach out to his dad, because as you say in the documentary, the Guild kept returning your mail as undeliverable. Any contests that you would find in was it 16 magazine that
16 magazine, yeah.
Yep. That you grabbed out of your sister's room under her nose, even though she knew it. Entering contests and the like. But you finally got a response at some point, and I'd like to focus on that for just a moment. I know you talk about it in the documentary, but if you can recall your 15, 16-year-old self, what was it like actually receiving a response from somebody who was in a field that you were interested in?
Well, obviously it was a momentous occasion for, for people who've seen the film, they'll appreciate, it was just to get any response, but at that point, if it had been his agent, anybody, it would have been, huge.
Yep.
Trying to think back on it. I mean, I luckily have my diary to kind of to remind me of what I was thinking, but yeah, it was great. I think at the time I was hoping to kind of establish kind of a, I thought he was maybe going to be my pen pal for a while. But, now I've finally gotten through, we're going to be, friends.
Right.
But no, it guided my life, It definitely had an effect on, everything I did after that.
It must have been an impressive experience. Actually, I'm just reminded, and this is not about me, it's about you, but that particular moment reminded me of the time, because I was big into hotels, and I think I was big into collecting travel brochures and cruise line books and things like that. And the mailman stopped my mom one day and said, "Are you guys planning a worldwide cruise somewhere? Because you keep getting these brochures to all of these exotic destinations." And she said, "No, that's my son. He collects them." So I feel your joy at that moment, and it really shines through for a number of reasons, one of which I'll touch on in just a moment. But again, I think your documentary has the power to pull in people of like-minded personalities who try to aspire to be something more than what they are at that age, and have foresight to be able to work their way towards their goals. And it just, the documentary spoke to me on a very personal level, and again, thank you for sharing it with the world. And we here at Desperado are very lucky to have it, and to be able to share that with a virtual audience. An in-person screening would have been more preferable, I admit, but nevertheless, more eyes are getting to see it, and the exposure is going to be really good for the documentary and for your efforts. But I want to focus again on your animation and your relationship with your sister, Carmela, who was just a hoot to watch in the documentary. And I know I can only imagine what she's like in person, because you both have, you know, from the documentary and from talking to you here, you both have a very vivacious personality. It's effervescent and it's affecting in a very positive way. I know she supported you in your efforts to develop your plot line. If I'm not remembering this correctly, stop me, but, you know, help you with the animation and support you in your journey. And I'm sure whenever you brought out your big book with all of your grand ideas, she probably rolled her eyes and said, "No more, Dion."
Oh, absolutely. She was just not at that. Yeah, when we were teenagers, she was. I mean, I could have done anything, you know. As the little brother, it would have been embarrassing, you know, let alone to develop this plan to make a film and, you know, involve everyone in the school in it and walk around with a Milno Lives t-shirt. She was no, she did not. She was not having any of it. But, you know, as most kids do when they grow up, you know, we got a lot closer. And yeah, she was tremendous in the film, like surprisingly so. I've said this many times when after the interview was done, I was just like, Carmela, why didn't you tell me you were a complete natural? I had no idea. I was like, we've got to get you in more documentaries, you know. And, you know, through the whole process of making the film and submitting the film and getting rejections and then COVID, and, you know, she was always there for support and to offer, you know, advice. And she's an artist herself. She actually, for a long time, was a professional sign painter. Wow. So yeah, she's super talented. So whenever everything has gone past her, from the animation to the posters, everything's, you know, her input. Her and Andy were, and David Zutter as well, who's also, I have to say, Andy and David Zutter all could have been professional art. Actually, Andy was for a while. They're all super talented, so they were all sources of, you know, guidance.
Yeah. Speaking of David Zutter, I want to compliment you and he on the music for the documentary. Again, it's just another layer of bubbly effervescence that really carries the spirit of the documentary, and he did a wonderful job with the score. It fits every moment like a glove. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, since we're on the subject of Ike for just a moment, or segue into the subject of Ike, I don't think it's generally known, unless you follow his career, that even though he did not burn out from being a childhood actor like so many childhood actors experience, he was pursuing animation at the same time. And because of his connections at the time, he actually had achieved a, I don't want to call it a scholarship, but he had an entree into Disney's animation program, and the school of his choice to be able to become a proficient animator. But by the time he had finished his schooling, Disney's traditional animation unit was on the verge of shutting down. And so I don't know if many people know that, but he had to look for other opportunities. And again, just like yourself, you're both very inventive, you're both very forward thinking, and you keep your progress moving forward. And so he ended up getting behind the scenes. And so when you learned that, and again, in parallel with your own experience, based on Albert Eisenman's letter to you, you ended up going to, forgive me, I've forgotten the university in Akron. Thank you. And then you went to Chicago, and you had an opportunity to be involved in TV work and editing. And I think you both discovered that while animation was a passion, it wasn't going to pay the bills. And so you needed to find a different path. And so can you talk just a little bit more about that path?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. The first pre-interview I had with Ike, when I finally decided to go ahead with production of this, we were talking about animation. He's actually never done animation himself. He owns, in the film, he owned an animation studio for a while, but he was the producer. He didn't do, and he told me that he had recently sat down with some 3D software and kind of was playing around with it. And after a while, he just was like, yeah, this isn't for me. And it's just animation. It really takes a specific type of person. And, you know, and it's always been something I've played around with and dabbled with. And, you know, in the 90s, I took some classes and really got into it. And, you know, I still have boxes of paper, you know, of my actual animation. And the one thing that really struck me doing that when I was taking those classes was like, you know, to finish an assignment, you're sitting there for hours drawing and drawing in the same, and it's just exhausting and really difficult on your body. And yeah. At that point, you know, I was pushing 30, was I? I don't know. But I was like, I don't know if I could do this for a living. Right. It's really hard. And even actually just yesterday, I was editing and I hadn't really sat and worked on a project for a long time, but it's really tough on the body. So yeah, that's just like a part of animation I never even considered. But even just the mindset, I think, is a very specific kind of, it takes a specific kind of person. And I don't know if it was the universe just kind of guiding me toward what was more fit, you know, my kind of speed, but I just always ended up I would try to do animation and I'd end up working in video, you know, because in college, it's a lot cheaper to, you know, make a film on video than on film. I was just always getting channeled back towards video and then towards editing. And, you know, when I was a kid thinking, oh, I want to make movies, and that was really it. I wanted to make movies. I don't know if I specifically wanted, I know I didn't want to sit there and draw, you know, all day. I wanted to be like, you know, the big head honcho. But even back then, I don't think I knew what an editor was. I didn't think it was, I mean, you see the word, but who knows what it actually means? I think most people don't even know. People are always asking me, you know, what do you do? So when I finally sat down and edited stuff, I was like, oh, this is pretty fascinating. So it just kind of was something that always was kind of, you know, hello, this is what you should be doing. And when I finally moved to California, and tried to get a job in animation, it would just prove to be so impossible to get an entry-level job because most of them just don't exist in this country, really. And same thing, I got a job at a production company and thinking I was gonna maybe work in their graphics department because they did a lot of 3D models of old historic cannons and things like that. It was a documentary place. And I ended up in the editing department.
That's awesome. We've talked. I've always found editing fascinating because you have the opportunity to sit down and actually shape the footage that was shot. And if I'm remembered correctly, you primarily edit documentaries for television. Yep. And so you have a chance. I would imagine that editing a television documentary is significantly different from editing a narrative feature. Because you have footage that, even though it might be shot out of order, it has to fall in line in a specific way. And even though you might get notes from the producer or the director about what they're looking for, it's really your vision as the editor that puts all the pieces of that puzzle together to create what we end up seeing on television. And I've always found that a very fascinating prospect because, as I said, you're piecing together those pieces of the puzzle. But I would imagine with Dear Ike that you probably had a very different kind of an editing process. You edited the film yourself. If I remember correctly, I know you directed and produced it and wrote whatever script you had planned for the documentary, or at least the through line.
Right.
But you were editing personal memories of your own experiences and your life, for lack of a better phrase, right?
Right.
Did did that have any influence on how you approached editing your own documentary, or in effect editing yourself?
Well, I mean, it was definitely a challenge. I mean, through the whole process, you're thinking to yourself, does any of this matter to anyone? Should I just cut it down to 5 minutes and, all this other stuff could just go. It was really a test. And luckily, towards the end, I did run it by some people who were like, oh yeah, you can lose this, lose that. And, that's always one of the hardest things about an editor, is that you fall in love with these little bits, and sometimes they just got to go. And there's some really great, I think actually they might end up on the website someday, the little bits, because they're full-on animations that I just had to lose.
Yeah.
But as far as, I think I learned a lot from working on the TV documentaries and just how to approach it. And I kind of, because in TV, you're on a pretty strict schedule. We had like 6 weeks to finish a show.
Wow.
So there's a pretty regimented way of doing things. And so I kind of stole that and used it to do this. I knew I wanted to start with a script. I didn't want to sit down with just, okay, here's 12 hours of footage, make something of it. That's that's a whole nother problem. So I started with a script. I knew in the interview what I needed to say, what I needed Ike to say, what I needed Andy to say. So yeah, that I think helped a lot.
Well, and most documentaries don't start out with a script. I don't want to say that it's like boiling a pot of pasta and throwing the wet noodles against the wall to see what sticks. There's a process and a flow, but I think with starting with a script and knowing what you wanted to achieve, you developed your framework that allowed you to work within those restrictions, and I would imagine made the editing process a whole lot easier, because you knew where you wanted to go with the story.
Right. Oh yeah, I think the editing process, a big part of it is because I'm an editor, was
Right.
maybe one of the smoother processes of it. The most time I spent obviously was doing the animation, but
Right.
And I love editing. So any chance anybody would say, oh, maybe you can change this, and we're like, okay, I'm on it. Let me just do it 3 different ways and see which one works best.
Right. Right. You can't give yourself notes though in this case.
No, thank God. No notes. That was one of the things going into this. Like, one of the reasons I didn't bring on a lot of investors or anything, or any investors actually, just because I didn't want to deal with notes, because that's all you deal with working in television. You finish this piece and this is great, and you send it off and you get 3 pages of like, I don't understand this, change this. And yeah, I was like, no, this is my project. I can't deal with that. So no notes.
Good for you. Actually, I think that's an important distinction that the audience who's watching this video might appreciate, that you self-financed this documentary. And I know your credit cards are probably thanking you now that the film is being shown around festivals. And that's probably not an easy feat. I mean, it's probably an easier feat than having to have investors. But I think one of the key proponents of your team is Andy. who you've mentioned a number of times, because if I'm remembering the documentary correctly, it was a chance conversation with him that led you to eventually getting your idea in front of Ike and establishing that connection. And that is one of many beautiful moments in the story, especially the way you ferociously approach Andy when he's gone to visit Ike to say, did you show it to him? Did you show it to him? Did you show it to him? And, you know, both your reactions are just absolutely priceless. You know, you have the chance to get your idea in front of Ike, and Andy was all too happy to make that happen. There was, I think, in relation to Ike's dad, and for those who might watch this before they see the documentary, I'm not going to make that reveal. But I know that it was a difficult subject for all involved, and really a tender and touching moment on the part of Ike. But before we get to that, what was it like? You kind of alluded to it a little earlier with your pre-meeting before actually getting into the documentary, but what was it like before all of this happened for you to actually meet your teen idol so many years later?
It was surreal, of course. Well, and the first time I actually met him in person, I just kind of gloss over in the film. There's a photograph from that moment, you know. Too bad we didn't have film cameras or anything following me around. But yeah, it was just one morning, Andy called me up and he's like, how soon can you be out of the house? I was like, why, what's going on? And it turned out that, well, first of all, I should say that Ike doesn't live in LA anymore. He lives in Florida.
Yep.
But he was in town for, you know, maybe 2 days, because something he was working on was screening at a theater, ironically, right down the street from my house. So, you know, it was just kind of like, hurry up, come on, let's go. And then we met him, and it was like, just briefly, because he had 1,000 other things going on. So, and it, you know, I said this before too, it's strange because, I mean, he's an adult now. He's like, I still have kind of a hard time, like, believing that that's the same person. You know, it's like there's two different people. You know, there's the Ike that I know and I've worked with, and then there's Ike Eisenman, you know, the teen actor who it's just two different people. So it's still, to this day, you know, I just kind of have to remind myself, oh, that's really Ike. That's the one you really wanted to meet, and there he is. So, but yeah, it was a really brief moment. And then the next time I met him was the day of the interview. Actually, no, he was in town because they were doing a screening of Wrath of Khan, and I met him after the screening. So that was the second time I met him. But yeah,
that's awesome. You know, I alluded to, actually, I didn't allude to anything. When I reviewed the movie, you know, you treated your documentary like a fan letter to your idol. And I, in turn, treated my review like a fan letter to the both of you, because, as I said, you really touched me in a very unique and profound way, because I think of our journeys as similar. And your documentary has the power to connect people in a very unique way, because I don't think we realized, even as interconnected as we are with social media, with technology, to be able to video communicate across short distances of 5 hours, and email and other instantaneous forms of communication, I don't think we still realize yet as humans just how similar our paths really are in terms of our growth. And Dear Ike has the power to show the world what we as humans are capable of, with just a little bit of tenacity and temerity and gumption.
Right?
Yep. Yep.
People those old letters. Yeah.
Absolutely. But it's that power of connectedness that I think your documentary really reaches and opens our eyes to. And it's amazing that after so many years, you finally had the chance to not only interview your teen idol, but to actually meet him. And we talked just a moment ago about when you met him off camera, but I'd like to talk about the day that you interviewed him. And if I'm remembering correctly, it was just one day, but it was a couple of hours over that single day. And again, the mood in the documentary during that scene is very somber, but it's also very touching because there's a real empathy that comes out of that scene and out of your documentary, a real understanding that helps to convey the emotions that I just shared. I know that Ike had related his story to you before you shot that scene, but what was it like to actually get to talk to, not just have a quick conversation with your idol, right? But to actually have a meaningful conversation about his life?
It's odd because on the day of the interview, I was kind of, I was in director mode. So I was just like, I need to ask this and this and this, and he needs to say this and this and this. So I think I didn't even realize the depth of his reaction until I sat down to edit stuff. And I was like, oh, that changes everything. Because and I don't want to give away too much in case people haven't seen it, but yeah, his actual reaction to his dad's letter really shifted the entire direction of the film. Once I sat down, I had to work backwards from there. And it made it, I think it gave it a much clearer direction of everything I needed to do, and kind of paralleling the two of us and what we went through. So it was only, I think maybe the next time I really talked to him was the day I picked him up at LAX when he came in town for Dances with Films. And that was the moment we really had a chance to kind of talk about things, in a more casual atmosphere. So
he actually hadn't watched the documentary until I'd had a chance to interview him. And so, his reaction to seeing himself on screen, if I'm remembering our interview correctly, was cathartic, because not only are you watching yourself react, which is probably freaky enough. Don't worry, I won't be watching my own interviews for the festival. But the ability to convey emotions, especially that strong of an emotion, and then to see yourself on screen is, I would imagine, even for yourself, seeing yourself talking through different parts must have been, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, must have been a difficult prospect, because you are who you are in front of a mirror, right? We all are. But to see yourself on screen as large as day, right? Must have been a freaky experience in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
And, but as I said, you have such a jovial personality that you have a gift for making people comfortable within their own skin and wanting to get people to laugh. And I want to circle back to that Dances with Films screening, because that was the very first time that you'd had a chance to watch the film with an audience. And with the benefit of virtual screenings, we have an opportunity to get the movie out to as many people as possible. But with an in-person screening, you have the ability to see how your film is connecting with people. And I know you talked a little bit at the beginning of our interview here about that reaction, but Did you encounter an audience reacting in a way that you didn't expect when they watched your film?
Look, you know, it's funny. Like I said, I had like the little notes where I was, okay, this moment's coming up. Are they gonna laugh? And you know, 99% of the times they reacted how I would hope they would act. There were a couple times actually when there was laughter that I wasn't expecting, which was, hey, you know, the more laughs you get, the better. You know, what more can you ask for? So yeah, well, I'm not going to go into the actuals, but there was a scene towards the end where people laugh, and I was just like, oh, okay. It's funny. I guess it is funny, you know, but it wasn't, I guess, just impossible for me to see, you know, just, you know, that's the, you know, looking at myself, that was always the tricky part about working on this film, was getting the, you know, kind of an objective eye on everything. And I think that was, you know, same thing for Ike when he watched it the first time. It was just, you know, on TV or on someone's computer. I'm not even sure. But I think it was definitely, he got a different appreciation for the film watching it with a whole audience.
Yeah. You know? I can only imagine it. But as a matter of fact, I watched it on the very same device that we are using to record this. And one of the interesting aspects of Dear Ike is that if you're sitting in front of your computer, you have a direct connection to what's on screen, right? You are within your own thoughts to watch it. You don't have somebody laughing at an unexpected moment to make you think about what you've just seen and say, I should have found that funny. Why didn't I? Or maybe I found something funny that somebody else didn't find funny. Whereas when you're watching it by yourself, you are in your own zone. And pardon my hand movements, but I think that's what really connected me with your documentary, is that I'm alone with my own thoughts, as perverse as that might sound. I'm able to focus what's on screen. And I like to imagine that I would have laughed at the same points that you had notes for, and the unexpected points too, because again, your documentary has the power to connect people in very unexpected ways and good ways. And you know, it's a powerful, moving documentary, and I can't thank you enough for it, because even as we come out of the Delta variant of COVID and people are still skittish about going to the movies, you know, you offer a ray of hope and light where, especially in the LGBTQ community, where people struggle every day for a variety of reasons to come out to their families and or to discover who they are and accept themselves. And you know, the fact that Ike is an ally and is somebody who his own growth was in some ways challenged as a childhood for different reasons. He had to face his own reality. And I think this documentary helped him to do that. We all have to face our own realities, and your documentary helps the LGBTQ community to make those realities a lot easier to overcome if you're accepting of the documentary and its message. And again, I want to thank you very much for your time today, Dion. It was a genuine pleasure. I know we spoke probably about a month ago, and my video camera wasn't working. So it's really nice to put faces together and this opportunity to interact with you. And again, thank you for sharing your movie with the world. And I'm stammering here because I'm at a loss for words, but I'm in awe. So thank you.
Yeah, it's great, Dion. I appreciate it. There's a lot in the movie that I thought was so representative of my own childhood. I mean, I watched Escape to Witch Mountain, of course, and
Right.
Return to Witch Mountain, and all that stuff. And I had crushes on all kinds of guys as a kid, including Ike and Sean Cassidy. I had the same kind of haircut, right? So yeah, it was great to see some of this footage you had in the film, and thanks for sharing it with us.
Oh yeah, it's my honor completely.
Thank you very much to our audience for joining us for this conversation with Dion Labriola, the director of Dear Ike, Letters to a Teen Idol. I keep saying teenage, and that's not in your subtitle. And we hope that you've enjoyed this, and look forward to bringing you more interviews and Q&As and all kinds of other opportunities to see behind the scenes of what it takes to make the films that the festival presents. I hope you've enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.